The mission is simple: to help high achievers naturally eliminate emotional and physical obstacles so they can optimize their life for higher achievement. Welcome. You have just entered the Genesis Zone. Good day, and welcome to the Genesis Zone Show. I'm Dr. Brian Brown. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us on this beautiful Thursday. Today, we're talking about stress and its impact on your genes, and the number one free, yes, I said free way to take control of that stress and make a positive impact in your genetic function. The number one question I get asked all the time, because what we do on a functional medicine level, insurance doesn't pay for, and I realize that it's out of the reach for some people that inquire about working with me, and that's okay. And they'll ask, is there anything that I can do right now to begin to take control over my genes and have a positive impact on those genes? The answer is yes, there is. Now, I talk about this in my free boot camp that I have, that I'll pop a link up later, and I'll mention it later. But I talk about multiple ways that you can do this, but I'm going to talk about one particular way that's not mentioned in the boot camp that I think is critically important, because it seems like here lately, this has been a theme among the clients that I've been working with. And after doing a little bit of a deep dive into it, because I already knew the positive impact of it, but after doing a little bit of a deep dive into it and finding the connections, I was able to determine that, yes, this too makes an impact on our genes. And I'll explain that here in a minute, what that is. And you're going to want to stay tuned for that, because it might actually shock you. It's not a very popular topic, but it's something, and I'm not talking about diet or exercise either. Okay, so get that out of your mind. Yes, diet and exercise work to positively impact your genes. We are not talking about that. We are talking about something totally different. And I think it may surprise you what we're going to talk about today. So in my deep dive, what I've learned is that the hypothalamus, which is the master regulator for your nervous system, for your hormone system, within your brain, has an anterior portion and a posterior portion. Now, there are multiple different anatomical parts of the hypothalamus, but we're only talking about the anterior, which is the front part of the hypothalamus, and the posterior, which is the back part of the hypothalamus gland. Now, the anterior portion of the hypothalamus is responsible for rest, digest, and repair. And the back portion of the hypothalamus, the posterior portion, is responsible for fight or flight responses. Now, what happens in the body when a person experiences a threatening event, such as, let's think about our ancestors. Let's say a saber-toothed tiger was charging at us with teeth and fangs, and we had to do something. We either had to fight, we had to flee, run, or we had to freeze. Another term for that is fawn, meaning you just freeze up, curl up in a ball, and play dead, basically. So fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And those are our options when that fight or flight response, that adrenaline response, kicks in, and that's controlled by the posterior hypothalamus gland. Now, what we know is that we used to think that the hypothalamus, the fight or flight response, was responsible for turning off the rest, digest, and repair. The opposite is true, and this matters to a degree, because when people today come into the office and they come into my clinic, and we're able to test their nervous system in real time using a very expensive, very specific device that comes out of Germany, we're able to measure this nervous system in real time, and we can tell whether somebody is in chronic fight or flight, or whether they are able to cross over into rest, digest, and repair very easily. We can see what's going on in real time. We can see which stimuli, in this case sound, actually causes them to either switch into fight or flight or come out of fight or flight. And the anterior portion, that front portion of the hypothalamus, kicks in and they enter the rest and digest phase. What we used to think is that the fight or flight response system was responsible for cutting off the rest and digest system. The opposite is true. As I said just a minute ago, the anterior portion of the hypothalamus, the rest, digest, and repair, is responsible for voluntarily saying, I'm stepping down out of commission and I'm allowing fight or flight to take over at this point. Now, that's a critical discernment there, because if fight or flight is the one driving the car, so to speak, then you might naturally think that it's normal for a person to gravitate easily towards fight or flight. It's not. Our internal mechanism of function is controlled by the anterior hypothalamus, or it should be, in the rest, digest, and repair. So that should be the system that is on most of the time, and allowing the internal physician, those healing mechanisms within the body to naturally take place. Because when you're in fight or flight, you're not able to heal and repair. You need to be in rest and digest mode in order, or the parasympathetic nervous system response, in order to be able to repair and activate that internal physician. So what happens is when we have that saber-toothed tiger coming at us, then the parasympathetic nervous system response in the anterior hypothalamus voluntarily says, I'm stepping down and allowing my brother over here, the fight or flight mechanism, to come into action. And that takes place. So with that being said, our natural function should be to be in a place of rest, digest, and repair most of the time. Because let's face it, we don't have saber-toothed tigers that are coming at us. We don't live in a place where lions and tigers and bears, oh my, are coming after us on a day-to-day basis. We're not having to forage for our food. We can go to the grocery store. For the most of us, for the most part, can go to the grocery store and obtain our food. We get these stresses that put us into fight or flight from different mechanisms within our environment and from our past history. So past trauma can create a chronic state where the internal physician, the parasympathetic response, that anterior hypothalamus, has stepped down out of commission and allowed fight or flight to stay in control. And until the fight or flight decides to tone down and allow the internal physician to pop back up and do its job, then things are going to constantly stay out of balance. And we end up with things like chronic disease. We're now linking stress to cardiovascular disease. You're thinking, well, duh, we've known that for a long time. That's right. But we've also linked chronic stress to diabetes. We've linked chronic stress to cancer. We've linked chronic stress to high blood pressure. We've linked chronic stress to low immune function and autoimmune diseases. The list goes on and on and on and on, what chronic stress is linked to. And it's all throughout the medical literature. We can see this. In fact, there was an article that I was reading when I did my deep dive that said, in fact, that experts at Harvard and Yale believe that stress is the number one cause of disease, chronic disease, in the entire world. So what do we do about this stress response? Well, we need to learn how to deactivate that stress response. Now, short of coming into the clinic and us checking the genetic landscape and seeing how you're hardwired to respond to stress, and then doing a real-time analysis measurement of what your nervous system is doing, and then finding that frequency, that tone that causes the anterior portion of the hypothalamus to vibrate in resonance with the rest of the body. In other words, it activates the healing frequencies and deactivates the fight or flight frequencies. Short of doing that, I'm about to give you something that you can do right now that you may or may not have thought of before, okay? And it boils down to having offense against another person. One of the number one reasons that people come into my office and need to take care of things is because they've been hurt by someone. This may be someone they were in relationship with intimately. It may be someone they were in relationship with as a child, in their formative years, as a teenager, in their early adult years. Someone has hurt them and they've held this offense inside. Now, culture teaches us, and this is where it goes sideways. Culture teaches us that to forgive a person is literally we're kind of instructed to forgive and forget, to move on, put it behind you. That's not healthy, by the way. Okay. So to forgive and to forget is to ask to have somewhat of an Alzheimer's state induced upon you so that you never remember what happened. That's not good for survival, because the proverbial touching the stove. I mean, how many times as a child do you have to touch something hot before you realize that's hot? I don't want to touch it again because it hurts me. You don't have to do that very many times. Now, if you had this self-induced Alzheimer's because you wanted to forgive and forget, then you would go back and you would touch that hot object, that stove, over and over and over again until there was no more flesh left on your bones because you've literally burned it all off. I know that sounds gross, but literally we do not want to forgive and forget. Okay, so what is the alternative to forgiving and forgetting? Well, we think, okay, well, I've forgiven that person. I understand that we don't forgive and forget, but we think forgiveness is a one and done type of thing. It's not a one and done thing, okay? Because when we forgive, that is a verb that is an active verb. It's an ongoing process. So one of two things usually happens when I have a person in the office, and they will come to me and they will say, God, I've forgiven this person before, and it just keeps coming up in my mind, and I'm beating myself up because it seems like I can't get rid of that feeling that keeps coming up again of what they did to me. And so that's the first thing that happens. You beat yourself up. Okay. The second thing that happens is that you're in this place where you don't understand that forgiveness is an ongoing process. So you think that it should be one and done, and you're confused about it. So you've got the one and done mentality, and then you've got the mentality of beating yourself up. Typically, the two go hand in hand. Okay. And when you understand that forgiveness, letting go of offense, is an active, ongoing process, it totally sets you free. And here's how you do that. Whenever that feeling comes back up in you, whenever that person that did you wrong, or in your mind did you wrong, whether they did or didn't, their perception is they probably didn't do anything wrong. Your perception is they did do something wrong. I'm talking about your perception. You perceive this person is wrong. You have forgiven them and tried to move on, yet it keeps coming back over and over again because that person triggers you, a memory triggers you, a thought, a sensory input. You hear something that reminds you of that event or that person. You smell something that reminds you of that event or that person. You see something, something brushes against you, and it brings back a tactile memory of what happened in that event. Then you have a decision to make. And the decision that I'm going to try to guide you into is actively acknowledging, yes, that stinks. Yes, that hurt. And then I want you to do one more thing. After you acknowledge it, I want you to close your eyes just briefly and picture that person in front of you, and out loud, just say, I forgive you. It's as simple as that. Now, you may have to do this 1 or 2 times a day. You may have to do this 100 or 200 times a day. It's okay. All right. Hear me when I say this. It is okay to have this active, ongoing process of forgiveness toward another person. Now, hear me when I say this. And people who are being forgiven do not understand this, but I want you to understand this. Forgiveness and trust are two totally different things. We get this impression in culture that to forgive someone means that I fully trust them again. Not true. Trust has to be built back over time. Trust may never fully be built back to what it initially was, even if trust was there in the first place. And I venture a guess in a lot of cases, trust is never fully there in the first place. However, if it was, typically we don't really ever go back to that full place of trust unless there's something miraculous that happens within us and within that person to bring that about. So it's okay that when you're around that person, if you still have to be subjected to that person, to not trust them. But it's okay to have an active, ongoing process of forgiveness toward them. Okay. Hear the differentiation there. Forgiveness is a process that is for your psyche, for your emotional health, for your spiritual health. It's not about the other person. Okay. It's between you and spirit. And it's very important to differentiate that. People who think they should be forgiven, or they call you out for not forgiving them, they don't understand the principle of the fact that forgiveness is between me and spirit. It's not between me and that person. It's between me and spirit. But what is between me and that person is trust. And that bridge has to be built back over time. And when you understand that principle and you're able to explain that to that person, whether they receive that or not, it's on them. You know, they have to deal with their understanding of these principles. And if they don't understand them, it's their choice not to understand them, because they're really simple concepts to make breakthroughs in yourself. Now, how does all this change your genetics? Well, if we live in this constant stress of living in the past, we're destined to live with a depression, a melancholia, a sadness. Okay, when we live in the past, and when we're constantly dredging up that self-loathing, that beating ourselves up because this forgiveness thing keeps coming up over and over, and I thought I did that, I thought I took care of that. We're living in the past. And then if you worry too much about the future, like, oh, I just don't know that, because I feel like to forgive them means I have to fully accept them back. No. That's all future oriented. So trust is about taking care of the future, and forgiveness is about taking care of the past. But this all has to do with you. Okay. It doesn't have to do with them so much. Now, the future stuff with trust has to do with, in the future, how you will deal with them, but you're setting that precedence in the here and now. You're being very mindful about it, in that, listen, trust is a step-by-step process that has to be built back slowly. And it can occur rapidly, but it's typically very slow, because you've got two people involved, and usually one person is reluctant to step into that trust and do the hard work that trust requires in order to build back. And that's okay. That's their journey. And we need to be okay with the fact that if they don't accept that and they move on and they do their own thing, even hurtful things to you in the future, that just gives you another opportunity to say, you know what? I forgive you. Close your eyes, picture them. I forgive you. Because sometimes you can't change the stripes on a zebra, and sometimes we can't expect them to get that. And that's an okay place to be. It really is. As strange as it sounds, it's an okay place to be. So that's all I've got for today. If you want to know more tricks about how to understand your genetics at a deeper level, how to work with your genetics, how to maybe modify your genes free, with no cost, check out my boot camp, drbriangBrown.com/gene hack/boot camp. And I go through some very specific things in there that will help you start to modify your genes simply by doing the work, the self-work of ongoing forgiveness and trust, and building back trust and understanding that concept of what it's going to take on their part. Once you set that boundary in place, it frees you up to live in the present moment. And by doing so, you decrease inflammatory markers genetically in your body. In fact, you turn on genes that help you decrease inflammation, and you turn off genes that are producing inflammation. So it works twofold. And this goes back to the gratitude studies that I've gone over here on the podcast. Gratitude and forgiveness go hand in hand. So and you may be thinking, that's strange, I don't see how that works. But giving gratitude for being able to be in the present moment, giving gratitude to yourself for being able to be strong enough to do this ongoing forgiveness, to be strong enough to set a boundary of saying, okay, trust has to be built back over time. I'm not just going to accept you back with open arms. It's going to take time for us to work through this. And when you can understand that, you set yourself free, and you've also improved your genetic function. That's all I got for today. Until next time, this is Dr. Brian Brown signing off. Stay in the zone.